Thanks, Preston. Yo, let's get this energy up in here. It's just me and Pablo. Hazard, Stuart, where are you? Oh, there you go. Who's joining us?
It's the guy that wrote the...
Do we need another chair?
Yeah.
Can someone get us another chair and a beer? I've been told there's no beer in this venue right now, which was a miss. Awesome. So guys, we're going to be talking about webs of trust, something that I'm particularly pretty excited about. I think everyone on stage is pretty excited about this element of Noster. Before we start, we got a nice packed house here and a beer walking up to me, which is all. Can you open it for me? Does anyone have a bottle opener they can bring me? Thank you, guys. It's still we're very early days in this conference. We're working on the logistics here. Can I get a show of hands of anybody in this room that did not use Noster before this week? Okay, so we got a couple new people here. I think
Miles just did that with his bare hands, by the way, over there.
Thanks, Miles. I think we're going to keep this. It's going to be a more technical conversation, I think. I was trying to decide if we should go high level or not. So, I mean, we can start with high level. Pablo, what is webs of trust? Why should people care?
All right, so web of trust is basically the concept of inferring who should you be listening to from activity from the network. So if you, like, I'm friends with Matt, so...
Nice.
Huh?
That's awesome.
All right, good. So I'm friends with Matt, and maybe Matt is having a conversation with someone that I don't know. But the fact that Matt follows them, the fact that Matt is having a conversation with them, then that means that maybe this person is definitely not spam. There would be probably no reason for Matt to follow a spam account. So I can infer, without knowing anything from this pub key, I can infer that that it's not spam, that I should listen to what this pub key is saying, at least briefly, and maybe consider following them. So traditionally, we've had a top-down approach to who should you listen to, what is spam and what is not. And web of trust particularly becomes very, very useful to discern what is not spam and what is spam, or what likely is spam. And typically, it's been Elon Musk just KYCing people and just letting in a bunch of bots anyway. But it's been very top-down. You ask api.twitter.com, what content should I get from searching for something? Or if you go to global, what content should I receive? But it's a very top-down approach. Web of Trust has a very interesting feature, which is very similar to cryptography, in which it's very easy to compute web of trust, but it's really expensive to cheat a web of trust. It will be very hard for a spam account to get Matt and myself and Stu and a bunch of other people to follow that account. It's very, very hard to do that. But me seeing, okay, who does Matt follow? Who do the people that I follow? Who do they follow? It's super cheap. It's super easy to do.
Do we only have 2 mics up here?
Really?
Do you guys not have mics? Can we have some mics? Thanks, Preston. And I think there's one right behind you, Preston. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, as far as an overview, I don't think I have anything to add. What you?
Maybe you want to add something?
Yeah, you got something?
Just so everyone can follow along, I think it's good to give some initial definition. So I often talk about social graph instead of web of trust, just because when we talk about web of trust, it's obvious that you're talking about trusting some other people, but social graph is a more general terms, which just use how people are connected on Noster. And then you can use that for many different things. One thing is what Pablo mentioned, which is anti-spam measures or anti-denial of service attacks measures, for example. Just to give a brief definition, like Okay, what is a social graph? First, the second part, graph, is a mathematical structure which is pretty simple. It's just nodes and then how they are connected by edges. So a social graph is a graph where nodes and edges represent social things. So for example, social entities like people and social relationship like who follows who. And just by looking those simple things, you can pretty easily discern what is not spam, because it's very expensive, as Pablo said. It's very expensive or difficult to get follows from people, from real people, from people that have a reputation. And yeah, you can. I prefer to talk about the social graph instead of web of trust because the context do matter a lot. So it's not necessary that we talk about trust. So for example, when you can use social graph to do recommendation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is trust involved, other than you trust that the recommendation are not impersonating. So like I get Lynn Olden as a recommendation. The only trust is that that npub is not an impersonator, is the real Lynn Olden. But other than that, there is not much to it. So
Yeah, that's a good. I like that name versus like web of trust because it's not really a trust relationship, especially since like a lot of trust isn't like this thing you can easily measure and put into a graph. Whereas the kind of social graph is a lot more because
it's more open, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, web of trust prescribes how you should use it, whereas social graph is like a tool that you can use in multiple ways. And I would argue that it can be used to improve or solve many different problems. One is anti-spam, another is like recommendation and content discovery. Another could be anti-impersonation. So how do you know that Matt Odell is the real Matt Odell, or is that npub not another npub? How do you know from 50 different Jack npub which is the real one?
Well, the impersonators haven't started using caps yet. I noticed that.
That's very easy.
They're all still lowercase. Stuart, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I really like that distinction between the web of trust and social graph. I think that's really important to keep in mind because, like, the web of trust is a web of trust, or like, well, okay, let's say the following list of Noster, who you're paying attention to, it is a web of trust, but it's like a narrower web of trust that you're trusting them not to spam you. You're trusting them with your attention. And I think it gets down to a really practical question of like, should we fragment the web of trust or not? Because there's a temptation to want to be like a web of trust for following, a web of trust for hosting your data, a web of trust for couch surfing, a web of trust for all these different use cases. But I feel like that it just makes things really complicated. And so I think it's important to realize that like the web of not spam is a foundational web of trust because it is the thing that collapses the infinite space of pub keys into a finite reality of pub keys that are real, and you're paying attention to them in some sense, and so they're not bots, they're not real. So yeah, I think there's something very kind of poetic almost about the idea that asymmetric key crypto can be used to obfuscate and encrypt or sign and verify, and that maps directly onto the concept of a private sphere and a public sphere. You can't have a private sphere without encryption, without privacy, and you can't have a public sphere without some type of notion of authenticity, which is digital signatures. So the web of trust is like, the web of not spam is sort of like the base asset, the foundational pool of social capital that is sort of like necessary to construct more, like more niche, like ideas about who to trust for what thing, and that kind of gets into social graph territory. But anyways, I just think that distinction is like super brilliant and good to keep in mind. So yeah,
I like what you say there about the like not fragmenting the social graph because there is a temptation there, like fragmenting. Let's say like this is a social graph for stores that I trust, for vendors that I trust, for restaurants I trust and whatnot, or even banks I trust. And that would be useful in like many contexts, but one thing we can't forget is that data never becomes stale. It never gets constantly updated. And one benefit we have with the kind of, you might say, like Noster social web of trust, or sorry, social graph, whatever it is we're calling it, is that at least has some kind of cadence to getting updated. Like if the user's browsing their social media app and they see something they don't like, they unfollow the person or they remove them from that thing. And if we don't have a mechanism for the user to regularly, you might say, prune their social graph, then all we're doing is kind of building up bad data. And so, as far as like not fragmenting it, like I think that's a commonly overlooked thing, is like not only do you have to build the social graph, but you also have to make sure the social graph is pruned.
Yeah, because there has to be like a common denominator between use cases, and not spam is that common denominator, right?
But don't you trust different people for different things? Like, isn't
yeah.
it inherently fragmented, though?
Well, I think the not spam part is not necessarily fragmented. It's that the social graph is a kind of, that's where the annotation sort of should take place of the
yeah, I think there's a belief that you can have a very explicit fragmentation where you say, I explicitly trust Matt with regards to the Bitcoin topic on a scale of 0.97. And that's just not how people work. Like, our brains don't work that way. So you can infer kind of weights in this way on certain topics by analyzing activity. Like, I listen to RHR. So like that could be an activity that can go into, okay, how much do I trust Mari and Matt with regards to the Bitcoin topic? So I think that's where the fragmentation idea comes from, where people are not going to go out of their way to create all these attestations of and weights on topics, because yeah, they'll go stale. Like, maybe I'll say, yeah, I trust Stu on this topic this amount, and that changes, but I never update my attestation.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what to remember. Is like the best example of this would be like a attestation or a web of trust for something like journalism. Like, how much do I think this person is truthful, or do I think they're lying, or something like that? And it sounds really useful, but we just have to be careful of the fact that if we make that any explicit data, we can definitely, you can create apps to generate those social graphs and generate those trust scores, but we also have to be careful that those things have to be updated or maintained. Otherwise, we just generate, everyone gets a 5-star rating, and it never, the review never gets updated.
That's why those attestations must be the byproduct of actual interaction. It's got to be inferred from something that I'm doing on my daily life, not going out of my way to score my friends on how much I like them that day.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes extremely complex as if you were to do this trust attestation. I think there is a NIP, like NIP 87, 89, don't remember. Yeah. And yeah, if you do it once, like, okay, trust Pablo about in climbing on a scale from 1 to 100, like 89 or something. But then once I do this for 100 people, then it becomes difficult because I want those ratings to be like consistent with each other, because I trust him more than Odell in climbing. So it becomes super complex. So yeah, I totally agree that it should be a byproduct of user actions. Which one is like follow, another is mute, another is zap. With zap is a bit tricky, because to say that it is a signal, you have to be sure that the sender and the recipient are not colluding, for example. They are not the same person. Otherwise, there is no economic value moving.
Well, aren't zaps just not verifiable, so we shouldn't really put too much stock in them anyway?
Not Subsar, though.
Very true.
Ikash Subsar.
I mean, I guess you could use like a web of trust to decide if zaps are worth it or not to count. Just webs on top. Like, there is no web of trust, right? It's webs. There's many different
like
webs. Right. There is just one mempool. It's Wiz's mempool, but... okay, I mean, where do you guys want to go with this conversation? You guys are like prolific here. I'm just
I feel like
the entertainer.
I feel like this graph, whatever we're calling it, is like maybe the most important kind of thingy that's being sort of it's like an artifact that's being precipitated by all the activity on the Noster network. Like what you, I think that's like that. What you said a second ago about like demonstrating trust, I think that's actually kind of like a pretty deep point, because you actually have to like do stuff to demonstrate trust. otherwise, like what does it mean to trust someone? Like, like if we were not all like scrolling on our phones, experiencing the possibility of getting spam, why would we follow anyone? Or are we going to take a survey? But then, like you're saying, like it just is static at that point. So, like, if the trust is kind of like a reflection of some type of action. So all this action that's occurring, it is precipitating this type of web of trust in the world, which is like, I think it's, sometimes I say, I don't know if this, I think this makes sense to say that the web of trust is deflationary in a sense, where like, if you have an artifact, like a perfect example of this is the OG couchsurfing.org, which is now being built on Nostr, a fun fact, which I'm like excited about. But that was a perfect example of a bunch of people who did a bunch of stuff that was risky, which was stay at each other's houses, and then they created like a digital representation of that, and it was this big data set, and it was economically deflationary because people could go to a city and stay for free. And like what's really optimistic about Noster is that this web of trust that's being precipitated is similarly deflationary, but it is unkillable. It's like a ratchet. It just keeps growing. So like, you know, you can probably apply that notion of deflation to like social stuff too. Like you don't have to be as worried that people are going to rip you off. So you know, so I think that's what Noster is doing is like this web of trust is exportable from Noster. It is not something that is only relevant to Noster. It's relevant to the world. You know, it's quite interesting.
I mean, I feel like that's the key, right? Is like webs of trust is not a new concept.
No, thousands of years ago.
The biggest issue historically has been creating a robust, distributed, censorship-resistant one. Like all the successful ones have always been incredibly centralized. Things like eBay reviews or Airbnb reviews or Uber, right? But actually having it distributed and not controlled by a single entity is the key here, and Nostr unlocks that. And I think what a lot of people fail to realize is there's a lot of it kind of feels like the whole blockchain thing all over again. I mean, I know a lot of us are Bitcoiners, so we look at things with a bias, but it's like, I don't like Bitcoin, I like blockchain, right? And it's like you need the token. The token needs to exist for the Bitcoin system to work. And with Nostr, like everyone's like, not everyone, but there's a lot of people that fade the social media aspect, but say, I will want the other stuff. And the social media aspect is the bootstrapping mechanism that even makes this possible, because it's incredibly boring to like build out a distributed web of trust or multiple webs of trust just to do that. But it's not boring to shitpost or post memes or, you know, rage at someone online. Like that's the cool part. So in practice, let's try and take pull back a little bit. Let's go to like how this would actually work practically speaking. And I mean we've already kind of mentioned it with spam. We've already kind of mentioned it with impersonators. But like if you were, we'll go to you, Pablo. Like if you were going to like build a client that tried to stop spam from happening, and you were going to use a web of trust, how does that look on the user side? Like, how does the user interact with that, and how do you remove yourself from the equation of being the developer, choosing, you know, having too much control? Because one man's spam could be another man's censorship, right?
I mean, what I include in every single client that I build is when you log in, it fetches the people that you follow. It fetches the people that you mute, and it fetches the follows of the people that you follow and the mute of the people that you mute. And I then just compute a score. For all the pub keys that I know, it typically, like a normal account, ends up with like between 20, 25, 30,000 pub keys that I've scored in some way. And then I can just go to global, and I can look at all the nodes, all the events that are coming in. I can just filter out the ones that fall off of this web of trust. So for example, one of the clients that I wrote where this was super relevant was Wikifreedia, which is like a Wikipedia implementation of Noster, where for ideological reasons, but also for technical reasons, there cannot be a canonical entry. You cannot go to what is the entry for Riga, because who should I ask? Where is the entry for Riga? You have competing entries for Riga. So there might be 20, 50 different entries for Riga, and I sort them by the proximity of the people that have written the entry. And there can be explicit attestations because I have the concept of forks. So maybe I go and I see that Matt wrote something about Riga, and I want to make a modification. I fork his entry, and I can change it. So maybe he says, oh, Pablo's entry is better, so I'm going to point my entry to Pablo's. So now my entry would have my score and Matt's score. So if you follow both of us, it might rank higher because of that. But someone else might come in, they are whatever, into Cardano or whatever, and they will have a very different well of trust. And they might see a different view of Riga, and they might see a different view of all these different entries. So as a developer, I don't have a say on what content you're going to see, how things are going to look, what things are going to be spam. It's all going to be from your point of view.
Yeah, I don't like, honestly, that score. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it is similar to the Coracle, right?
It's
kind of similar.
You mean the display?
The score behind left next to the entry in Wikipedia.
Yeah, the score is displayed for debugging reasons, but I disagree, and I actually also told to Hodl about that. I don't think scores, because they are, you see a number next to an entry, and that number means basically nothing.
So then how should you display it? What's the better way to display it?
Yeah, I would because a number is summarizing that people to a number, and it is a bit prescriptive and not descriptive. So it is simpler to view my mind in another example, which is like anti-impersonation. So I click on the profile. It is Lynn Olden, or that's a display name. And then I would like to see the faces of the people I follow that also follow that MPub. And
what if like a bunch of impersonators of the people you follow are all following the impersonator? Like it's just impersonators following impersonators?
No, because it's based on me, basically. So I follow you, and you follow that MPub, and so I see your profile there.
Oh, okay.
And this way, so this is, I think, better because in some context, your opinion might be worth more or less than some other opinions. So like, for example, we might be talking instead of profiles, we might be talking about apps. For example, a great example is Zapstore. And Zapstore shows faces of the people you follow that also follow the signer of the app. So for example, if from those faces I see, let's say, MVK, and we are talking about or Craig Rowe, and we are talking about Bitcoin wallet, his opinion, in my mind, will weight more. But there is no way to like quantify that with a number, or at least the client that doesn't know which opinion I have of those people. But there is no need to summarize that. You can just show the faces, and I intuitively would know who to look for without having to summarize that into a number. You just have to see faces, and I think it's more natural, and also it ties more in what people are used to do, like in mid-space. So for example, when you don't know nothing about something, maybe about cars, you have no idea, like, yeah, maybe it comes to your mind that you have 3 friends that know about cars more than you do, but you don't think in numbers, you think in what people should I ask for better advice or better information about the topic.
And so, yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, we see that in a lot of centralized apps like Twitter has that where you see the little pictures and it's very intuitive. What are your thoughts on, it's kind of interesting, right? Because there's, and maybe it's also a product of the fact that Noster is so early and it's so young in its life, but there's a balance between how do you technically make something possible, how do you give a user sovereignty and power over their own situation, and then how do you display it to them in a relatively little friction way, because if you add any kind of friction, if you add power user things right in front of someone's face in the beginning, they probably just won't even use the tool in the first place. But I'm curious, so what's your opinion on in a perfect world, and we're way down the line, it's like everyone already has like their social graph and stuff on Noster, and it's a different situation. But as new people are joining, how do we attempt to mitigate the impersonator problem for that new person who's joining? Like they don't have a social graph yet.
Yeah, this is a good question, like the bootstrapping problem. If you're new and you come in and you don't know who to trust at the beginning, at first. What you can use is some. Well, obviously, you're never going to use followers count because that can be faked. So there can be. I like the idea, for example, of proof of work keys as a first introductory step, but not necessarily in that way, because proof of work keys are the UX around them is terrible, because you have at identity creation you have to commit energy to create that key that starts with a certain number of zeros. So that UX is terrible, but what it shows is that there are certain MPubs that have more skin in the game, that verifiable skin in the game, and that is a good place for initial bootstrapping. So if you know nothing about who to trust, you can start assigning some low level of trust of people that have verifiable skin in the game in terms of these proof of work keys, for example.
I have a very pragmatic approach. I just use my pub key. It's like literally.
You use someone else's pub key.
No, literally mine. Like.
But I mean, obviously you do.
So if someone creates a new pub key,
they use your pub.
It doesn't have any follows.
Yeah.
So it just fetches my web of trust and uses my web of trust, because I know that, like, they're already using my software. I know that I'm not fake. Like, I'm not spamming. So just that. It's like a very, very trivial approach.
You know, what'd be cool is if you could create an invite link to Noster that was based on your social graph. So you could be like, hey, like Noster, like, you should join Noster, and then you just send them a link, and it's like it imports your followers. That'd be cool.
I think, isn't like Manny working on something like that? Meet me on Noster.
Yeah, there are two projects that I know of that are working on that. That's one. Nostr.me. It's also has like the same idea where, like, you set up the profile for the person, and you can leave.
You even pick their relays and everything.
Everything, yeah.
The cool part with like the invite idea is that you only need one connection before you start building your own social graph. Like, it is a little bit further removed, but if I only followed like Pablo, then at least when I compute my social graph, it'll be one person, Pablo, plus all of his followers. So it scales really quickly, even with just one person. And then so maybe that one person is just a friend that introduces you to Noster, and they have at least a few followers. Then like at least you just have to go a few more layers out on the web of trust to get a decent number of like reputable people, you might say, or not spammers.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Stuart and Hazard, you guys have been working on Blossom, right? So Blossom is this idea of trying to tackle the media problem from different angles, whether it could be any file, but like video, photos. We're entering this world where you're going to have more and more AI deepfakes, where you have more and more situations where you don't know what's real. We're already kind of there in just like this post-truth environment. So I mean, I guess we'll throw it over to you, Stuart. How do you think about webs of trust mixed in with something like Blossom in terms of people? Because I think that's something that people can actually tangibly realize as a benefit early on, like in the next 6 months to 12 months. Yeah. Like, how is this video of Donald Trump real or not?
Yeah, so I think that like Noster is a very weird, special, exceptional instance where we have the opportunity to build data infrastructure on top of a social graph. And that's very backwards to normally how it goes. When you try to create some type of network, particularly a peer-to-peer network, is you usually start with like data infrastructure, like IPFS. But the problem with IPFS is that it's not a social network. There's no notion of identity, of like credibility. And so it doesn't work because everyone connects to everyone, and it's just slow and it's unworkable. So Nostr is a weird thing where we've kind of like memed into existence a social graph sort of thing. So like it's enough now that we can kind of leverage that to decide, or like, to make possible certain things, such as like if you want to host and pre-cache people's data. Like, so the thing that me and Hazard have been working on is, I'll just tell you guys. So we've been building this like satellite.earth has just been a web client for a long time, but we're doing like a new thing that's like a desktop app. So the idea is a bunch of edge devices that act as kind of like a deep web of Noster, and each person's node, as it were, pulls in, scrapes, and caches the data that you care about, which is by default the data that's in of people you follow. So blobs and events. So the kind of the high-level view of this is you have clients. The way I'm thinking about it is you have like clients like like mobile apps or whatever, like Coracle or Primal or something. They are clients of relays, and they're clients of Blossom servers for events and blobs, respectively. But the question is, I think, is worth asking, what are relays clients of? What are Blossom servers clients of? Like, where do they get data from? It would be cool if they could be a client of a deeper layer, because right now the only way like CDN Blossom servers or events or relays get events is the only way they get data is if people blast data at them. So that kind of works, but it would be really nice if you could sort of like pull data up from a deeper layer and put it on a relay or a Blossom server to blast it to clients. And that way clients don't have to deal with crazy peer-to-peer stuff. But that wouldn't have been possible to do that without this web of trust, because if you didn't have a notion of people who weren't spam, you couldn't have this nice thing of edge nodes that automatically pulled stuff in, because you'd be pulling in terabytes of garbage constantly. So that's a very concrete example, actually, I think. And yeah, Blossom is, you talk about it, Hazard. You know more than me.
I mean, there's like implementation side of it, which is more technical, but I'd say like the core of the Blossom idea, or the idea of my goal with Blossom was just we need to start signing hashes of the files. Like the file, no matter how the file gets to you, like it can come over HTTP, it can come over torrents, it can come over IPFS, it can come over anything. But we need a unified hash, and we need to sign the hash in the node, because otherwise if you don't sign it, you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, and that unified hash is effectively an interface. It's an interface to blobs that encapsulates the insane complexity of peer-to-peer stuff. And that is why it's like super smart not to start with the peer-to-peer stuff, but like some notion of federation like Mastodon has is pretty cool, as long as clients don't have to interact with it. As long as it's like hidden under this little layer of the Blossom spec and NIP01.
Yeah, and the cool part is like, to bring it back to like Web of Trust, is it's kind of the same thing with a Web of Trust and a social graph, is because you can't connect to the entire internet, because you can't plug into the entire internet, you need a starting point to know like what do I actually, not what do I want to plug into, because that's the user's decision, but what do I plug into for the user? Like what is the user's starting point for like what they find valuable? And that maps onto like a whole bunch of stuff, like you said, like event transmission, or like blob storage, file storage, or even just like recommendations or anything else like that. So where do you, if you can't plug into the entire internet, where do you start?
So you have with the hash. The hash is to be able to validate integrity of a file, basically, right? So you have this hash, and you're able to see if it's changed over time. The signature is essentially an attestation by a specific npub or whatever, saying this is the file. And then on top of that, there could be many people that are just changing that file and then re-signing it themselves with a different hash because they changed the file. So then you would need some kind of web of trust that's like, this is like this one is the real one and this one's the modified one, right?
Well, the cool part with the hashes is, I mean, you can't, unless you find a hash collision, you can't fake the hash. So
right.
What you get, as long as you can get it, is what you're looking for. The way the Web of Trust maps onto this is, how do you get it? That's the difficult part. Because again, like if you have this file identifier, if you have this this unknown file that you want. So let's say it's like a 10 gigabyte movie or something. Like, how do you find it? It's on the internet. You can't plug into the entire internet. So I found, like, so if it came from you, or it came from a podcast, or it came from somebody I follow, as I mentioned before, like the Web of Trust kind of signaling where you start plugging in, it can do the same for fetching data, similar to how we fetch events, where you're like, I'm looking for this file. I have no idea where it is. So instead of searching the entire world, I can start with my Web of Trust. And even better if I know who the file was from. But I can start with my Web of Trust, and that narrows down, you might say, like the search space for trying to find that one hash or that one file. It narrows it down considerably than trying to, like, start pinging every single file server on the internet.
So just to give more perspective, this maps into the Outbox model because it's the same idea of, I want to see your Stu's notes, to which relay should I talk to get his notes. For this is, I know that Hazard published the file with this hash ID. From what Blossom server should I get it? I will query for the list of Blossom servers that he uses. And now instead of having to just randomly query a bunch of different servers for this hash ID, I go to one of these 3 Blossom servers that he uses. And one cool thing is, you uploaded a file to one of your Blossom servers. He wrote a blog post linking to that file, explicitly linking HTTP, blah, 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 linking to that file. And that Blossom server, he deleted the Blossom server. So now that blog post that he wrote now has a missing file. The link is broken. But now you can query for the Blossom list that he uses, and you can fix the link. And when you do it for the first time, it's magical. Within a second, you get a 404 or whatever, like you cannot connect to the server, and you go to the next server, query for the same hash ID, and you get the file. And it's super magical.
Beautiful. Guys, we have a few minutes left. Let's just wrap it up with some final thoughts. We'll start with you, Stuart, and move down this way.
Well, to wrap it up, I like to think of Noster as like the Hydra, like the many-headed snake, you know what I mean? Like, you chop off one head and like 1,000 more just like pop up. I think that's what is kind of, the model that we should use to think about resilience, is that there has to be some sort of base level from which all these snakes spring up, like whack-a-mole. So like Pirate Bay in 2010, during the golden era of getting their domain name deleted by the government over and over and over again, was the fact that they just had a giant database of torrent files. And those torrent files were just metadata that referred to a bunch of stuff. So as long as it exists on one person's computer, it can always like spring up, and you can upload it very quickly to as many Blossom servers and as many relays as you want. So yeah, Noster is fundamentally an unkillable, undeletable medium, and the other problem is just how to deliver that data. But fundamentally, I'm extremely bullish on Noster because I sort of suspect that in like the kind of like post-truth era of not really being sure what's real, the ability just simply being able to digitally sign something at all and refer to some type of source of signal about whether or not this is real is going to probably move the needle more than anything else. Especially, like when AI impersonation becomes like more widespread, people are going to can absolutely freak out when you see like a video of yourself or something on the internet, and it's like, so like this digital signature thing is like a safe harbor in that storm, and that's probably going to drive a lot of people in Nostr, I think, personally. Yeah.
Yeah. That part is super important. Like knowing not what's real, because that's too much, but knowing who said what. That's good enough for most things. And I would say that the fact that we are moving towards, I think we are moving towards a world in which, as Odell says often, like the post-truth world, where you don't have to have consensus of what's real. You kind of come to your understanding of what is real, what is truth, what is coherent with your vision and that of your community. And yeah, the social graph is a tool that we can use. very, very powerful, and no one was able to use such a tool before because it was only developers of social companies that have the ability to use it. So obviously with such a power comes also the responsibility that we can do and should build something which is better and more sane than the world we are living. And this comes from establishing principles that make sense in the context of the post-truth world, where you don't go out and tell others what they should believe, but you give them tools so that they can decide for themselves what to believe, what to think, what to think.
Yeah, like that's. I don't think I can extend that. Like the only thing I gotta say is that like we built. There has been a lot of crazy experimentation done in Noster the past. I mean, for me, I've only been here like a year or two, but supposedly there was a lot of crazy stuff being built before that. I remember the early clients, but there's a lot of crazy experimentation being done. There's a lot of, even the cryptographic stuff will work that's being used in the network. It's crazy that users are actually using cryptographic keys on the internet now. But I think the craziest part is like we finally have an open social graph on the internet. We finally have data that nobody owns that is extremely valuable. And that applies to so much more than social. Like maybe it's not a trust, as you said, maybe it's not strictly trust, but it's a starting point that can start, like I said, in the era of where like the AI is just going to start flooding the internet with so much either misinformation or just noise. It's a starting point to start browsing the internet again instead of trying to filter all the noise out. And that's going to be, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, to that point, I think the navigating the internet via web of trust will be, it's kind of why it's titled like this, the talk, it will be the only way of making sense of things. Because like AI is such a perfect forcing function to adopt these schemes, there will be no other way. It simply will not make sense to consume data that is not signed. Like in 50 years, there would be like, what do you mean the internet was not signed? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Damn right. Thank you all. Can we get a huge round of applause for these gentlemen?